Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear viewers, I'm Zahur Islam and you are watching me on my YouTube channel Zahur Islam Official. So the topic which I'm going to teach you that is pharmaceutics, the colloidal dispersion. So before starting colloidal dispersion, what is dispersed system? So dispersed system consist of particulate matter. So one is dispersed space, and this dispersed space is distributed throughout a continuous space which is called dispersion medium. So we have already studied and suspension that which is a biphasic system and which one phase is dispersed in a dispersion medium. So the dispersed phase is the internal phase while the dispersion medium is the external phase. So the dispersion system or the dispersed system, it consists of some particulate matter in which two phase system they are used. One is dispersed phase, and then the dispersed phase can be distributed throughout a continuous phase which is called dispersion medium. So if we compare the concentration of dispersed phase with the dispersion medium, so the concentration of the dispersed phase will be less than as compared to the dispersion medium. So they are classified according to the particulate diameter. So on the basis of the particle diameter of the dispersed material. So come toward the molecular dispersion. So molecular dispersion is, what is molecular dispersion? Molecular dispersion when the particle size and the dispersion is that is less than 1 nanometer. So when the particle size is less than 1 nanometer, then the particles they are invisible in electron microscope. So it can easily pass through the semi-permeable membrane as well as the filter paper. The particles do not settle down on standing, but it can undergo the rapid diffusion. So in first of all, in the molecular dispersion, the particle size should be less than 1 nanometer, and then these particles, it must be invisible in the electron microscope, but it will pass through the semi-permeable membrane as well as in the filter paper. The particles they do not settle down on the standing, but it can undergo rapid diffusion. For examples, the ordinary ions and glucose. So the ordinary ions and glucose they can easily pass through semi-permeable membrane as well as the filter paper. So, and dispersion system, the second one is colloidal system. So, and colloidal system, what are colloids? Colloids actually just like suspension and emulsion, colloids in pharmaceutical sciences, when the particle size is vary from 1 nanometer to 0.5 micrometer. So actually, then colloidal dispersion, the particles they are not resolved by the ordinary microscope and it can be detected by the electron microscope. So the colloidal dispersion, it can pass through the filter paper, but not pass through the semi-permeable membrane. The main difference between the molecular dispersion and colloidal dispersion, that in molecular dispersion these particles can pass from the semi-permeable membrane and as well as the filter paper, but in colloidal dispersion the particle size is 1 nanometer to 0.5 micrometer, so they cannot be resolved by the ordinary microscope, but it can be detected by the electron microscope. But it can pass through the filter paper but do not pass through semi-permeable membrane. The particle made to settles, actually they are by centrifugation process. The particle it can make settle and it can diffuse very slowly. For example, colloidal silver solution and the neural and natural and synthetic polymers. So I mean that if we take the colloidal solution, silver solution, so it can pass through the filter paper, but it do not pass through the semi-permeable membrane. The reason is, and actually there is difference in the particle size. So in colloidal dispersion, the particle size is 1 nanometer to 0.5 micrometer. The third one is coarse dispersion. So in coarse dispersion, the particles they are visible under the ordinary microscope, and the particle size of the coarse dispersion is greater than 0.5 micrometer. So how we can differentiate between molecular dispersion, colloidal dispersion, and coarse dispersion on the basis of particle size. So in coarse dispersion, the particle size is greater than or higher than 0.5 micrometer. That's why it can be visible under the ordinary microscope, and it do not pass through the filter paper or semi-permeable membrane. So in coarse dispersion, the particle, actually this particle do not pass through the filter paper as well as the semi-permeable membrane, and this particle can settle down under the gravity, under the gravitational force, and it do not diffuse like molecular dispersion. While the colloidal dispersion they can diffuse very slowly. So the classical example of course dispersion is emulsion, suspension, and red blood cell. So we have already discussed in pharmaceutics about emulsion, about suspension, and about the red blood cells. So it do not diffuse, but the particle they are settled down under the gravity. Look at this table. In this table, I just highlight the classification based and dispersion system, how we can classify the molecular dispersion, the colloidal dispersion, and the coarse dispersion. So look at the particle size and molecular dispersion that is less than 1 nanometer. So the excellent example is oxygen gas and the ordinary ion and glucose. So the oxygen gas or ordinary ions are glucose. So it can pass through a semi-permeable membrane or it can pass through a filter paper. While in case of colloidal dispersion like silver solution and the natural and synthetic polymer latex, so it can pass through a filter paper but do not pass through a semi-permeable membrane. And colloidal dispersion, the particle size is from 1 nanometer to 0.5 micrometer. While in coarse dispersion, the particle size is less higher than greater than 0.5 micrometer. So for example, sand and pharmaceutical emulsion and dispersion and red blood cell. So I mean they are not diffuse. The sand or any pharmaceutical they are not diffuse, which I have mentioned here, but they do not cross the filter paper or as well as the semi-permeable membrane. So once again, so I'm very thankful to all of my viewers. So you are watching my lectures on my YouTube channels on regular basis. So if you need any kind of help or if you need these contents and soft form, so I'm available for any kind of services. Thank you so much for watching my lectures. Inshallah, I will talk about the size and the shape of colloids in my next lecture and what are the different contributing factors. Thank you.